I never believed in any of that, you know? I was always one of those people who laugh when someone comes out with strange stories, one of those who say that everything has an explanation, that people make things up because they lack excitement in their life or because they watch too many movies. I was the guy at the bar who would roll his eyes when someone started talking about lights in the sky or weird sounds at night. I worked at a lumber mill in northern Minnesota, had my routines, my beer on Fridays, my fishing trips in summer, my quiet life in a town where everyone knows everyone and nothing ever really happens. Winter of 2019 was one of the coldest I can remember, the kind of cold that hurts your face the second you step outside, the kind that makes your truck struggle to start even after you've plugged in the block heater all night. That December, I was living alone in a cabin, about 15 miles outside of town, one of those old places my grandfather built back in the 60s, solid logs, a wood stove that I had to feed every few hours to keep from freezing, no neighbors for at least 3 miles in any direction. I liked it that way, the solitude, the silence broken only by wind in the pines and sometimes the distant howl of wolves. My ex-wife used to say I was running away from people, from life, from anything that required me to feel something real, and maybe she was right, I don't know. But that night, that specific night that changed everything I thought I knew about the world, I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was just trying to stay warm and hoping the power wouldn't go out again like it had the week before. It was around 11 at night, and I was getting ready for bed, had just thrown another couple logs in the stove and was checking that the windows were sealed tight because the wind was picking up something fierce, making the whole cabin creak and groan like it was alive. I remember thinking I should probably drive into town the next day, stock up on more supplies in case a real blizzard hit, and I got snowed in for a week, which happened sometimes out there. Then I heard it. This sound that didn't fit, a kind of low humming that I felt in my chest more than heard with my ears, and underneath it, something that sounded almost like a high-pitched whine, like when you're near high-voltage power lines, except different, more organic somehow. I stood still in the middle of my living room, trying to figure out where it was coming from. And that's when I saw the light through the window, not the normal white or yellow of car headlights or a flashlight, but this blue-green glow that seemed to pulse and move in ways that didn't make sense, like it was breathing. My first thought, and I swear this is true, was that someone had an accident out on the logging road, that maybe a truck had gone off into the ditch and something with the electrical system was sparking and creating that weird light. I grabbed my heavy coat and my boots, took the big flashlight from by the door, and stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit me like a physical force, must have been 20 below or worse, and the wind was blowing snow in these strange spiraling patterns that the light seemed to be illuminating from above. I looked up, and that's when I saw it. This thing hovering maybe 100 feet above the tree line, completely silent now, just hanging there in defiance of everything I understood about physics and machinery. It wasn't saucer-shaped like in the movies. It was more irregular, almost organic-looking, with surfaces that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. And that pulsing blue-green light was coming from what I can only describe as veins or channels running through its structure. I stood there frozen, and not from the cold, just absolutely locked in place, my brain refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. It couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of military thing, a drone or experimental aircraft from the Air Force Base a couple 100 miles south. Except it was moving in ways nothing I'd ever seen could move, making 90-degree turns without slowing down, dropping and rising like it weighed nothing at all. Then it started coming lower, descending through the trees with impossible precision. Branches that should have snagged it or knocked it off course just seemed to bend around it. And as it got closer, I could see more details, panels or plates on its surface, circular markings that glowed with that same bioluminescent quality, and what looked like windows or openings that were too dark to see into. I should have run back inside, locked the door, grabbed my rifle, called someone, done literally anything except what I did, which was just stand there watching as this thing, this craft or vessel or whatever the hell it was, came to rest about 50 yards from my cabin in the clearing where I usually parked my truck. The snow beneath it didn't melt or blow away, it just seemed to compress and crystallize, forming this perfect circular pattern that looked almost intentional, artistic even. The humming had stopped completely, and now there was just the wind, and my own breathing, harsh and rapid, and I realized I was shaking, and not entirely from the cold. I don't know how long I stood there. Could have been seconds or minutes. Time felt weird, elastic, like I was moving through something thicker than air. Then a section of the craft's surface just opened, not like a door or hatch sliding or swinging, but like the material itself became permeable, and this ramp or walkway extended down to the snow, and I saw movement inside, shadow against that, blue-green glow. What emerged wasn't what you'd expect, or maybe it was exactly what you'd expect if you'd ever let yourself really think about this stuff. I don't know. It was small, maybe 4 feet tall, with proportions that were all wrong for a human, too thin, limbs too long, head too large for the body. It was wearing something, not clothes exactly, but some kind of covering that seemed to be part of it, and it was moving strangely, stumbling, one arm or appendage dragging, and even from that distance I could tell something was wrong. It made it maybe 10 feet down that ramp before it collapsed, just crumpled forward into the snow. And that's when I saw the wound, this dark fluid that looked black in the strange light, but I knew had to be blood or whatever passed for blood, spreading across the snow in a pool that steamed in the cold air. The craft's opening sealed itself. Immediately, that same fluid transformation, and then the whole thing just shot straight up. So fast I felt the displacement of air like a thunderclap, snow blowing in every direction, and it was gone, completely vanished into the night sky, leaving me standing there with this dying creature in my front yard. I want to tell you I thought clearly, that I made rational decisions. But the truth is, I just reacted on instinct. The same instinct that makes you pull someone out of a burning car or jump into a river to save a drowning kid. I ran through the snow to where it had fallen, my flashlight, beam catching details I didn't want to see, skin that looked almost translucent, too smooth, eyes that were too large and too dark, and looking up at me with something I recognized even if I didn't want to, fear and pain and desperation, the same look I'd seen in wounded animals, in my dad's eyes, when he was dying of cancer, that universal expression of a living thing that knows it's in serious trouble. The wound was in its side, a long gash that had penetrated deep, and that dark fluid was still flowing, and I found myself pulling off my coat without thinking, pressing it against the wound. Even though I had no idea if pressure would help, or if I was making things worse, if its biology was anything like ours or completely alien. It made this sound, high and whistling, and one of those 2 long hands reached up and gripped my wrist, and the touch was cold. So cold it burned, and I felt something pass between us, not words but meaning, a desperate plea that transcended language. I got my arms under it, and it weighed almost nothing, like picking up a child except the texture was all wrong, and I carried it back to the cabin, kicked the door open, and laid it down on my couch near the wood stove. The logical part of my brain was screaming at me, telling me I had no idea what I was dealing with, that it could be dangerous, that it could be carrying diseases or toxins, that I should call someone, the sheriff, the Air Force, somebody. But who the hell do you call when you've got a dying alien on your couch? What do you say? And more than that, I kept thinking about that look in its eyes, that plea, and I knew with absolute certainty that if I called anyone, they would take it. It would disappear into some government facility, and it would die alone in a cage being studied. Like a lab rat, and I couldn't do that, I just couldn't. So I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my first aid kit, the big one I kept for hunting accidents and emergencies, and I tried to help. The wound was bad, worse than I'd thought, and my coat was already soaked through with that dark fluid that had a smell like copper and ozone and something else I couldn't identify. I got towels, clean ones, pressed them against the gash, and it made that whistling sound again, softer, and its eyes, God, its eyes were locked on mine, and I found myself talking to it, saying stupid things, like it's going to be okay and hang in there and I've got you. The same things you'd say to a scared person, except I had no idea if it could understand. Its chest was moving rapidly, too rapidly, a fluttering kind of breathing that I knew was bad. And I realized I needed to clean the wound, to see how deep it went. I got water boiling on the stove, found the rubbing alcohol, and when I peeled back the towels and really looked, I saw that the wound was already starting to close on its own, the edges pulling together with these fine filaments that looked like they were growing from the tissue itself, trying to knit the tear shut. It was the most alien thing I'd seen yet, watching that biological process that was clearly advanced beyond anything human, but it was struggling. The filaments kept breaking and reforming, like the body was trying to heal but didn't have enough energy or resources. I cleaned around the wound as gently as I could, and every time I touched it, that cold burned my fingers, and I noticed my hands were shaking, partly from adrenaline but also from something else. This deep existential terror that I was holding back by focusing on the task, by treating this like any other emergency, instead of what it actually was, which was first contact with an alien species happening in my living room while a blizzard raged outside. The creature's hand was still on my wrist, that grip loosening and tightening, and I realized it was trying to communicate something, trying to show me something. Its other hand moved to its chest, to a spot where that covering material was thinner, and it pressed, and a section became transparent, and I could see inside its body, organs that made no sense, structures that looked technological and biological at the same time, and one particular node or organ that was flickering with weak light, pulsing irregularly. It tapped that spot, then pointed to a pocket or pouch on its side, and I understood. It needed something from there, medicine, or a tool, or something I couldn't imagine. I opened the pouch carefully, and inside were these small objects, capsules or vials made of that same liquid metal material, filled with different colored substances, and it pointed to one specifically, a vial with amber gold fluid that seemed to have its own internal light. I held it up, and it made a gesture I interpreted as yes, and I had this moment of absolute panic because I had no idea how to administer whatever this was, if it went in the wound, or was ingested or absorbed through the skin, or what. The creature seemed to sense my confusion, because it took the vial from me with trembling fingers, broke it open with a twist that made the material dissolve, and pressed it directly against that flickering organ visible through its transparent chest covering. The gold fluid absorbed into its body immediately, spreading through those vein-like channels, and the flickering stabilized, got stronger, and I watched in absolute amazement as the healing process accelerated, the filaments in the wound growing faster and thicker, pulling the torn flesh together, and the dark fluid stopped flowing, and its breathing, that rapid fluttering, began to slow and deepen into something more regular. Have you ever felt something you couldn't explain, something that made you question everything you thought was real? Have you ever been in a situation so far outside normal experience that you didn't know if you were awake or dreaming, if your mind had broken, or if reality itself was stranger than you'd ever allowed yourself to believe? Drop a comment and tell me about it, because I need to know I'm not alone in this. I need to know that other people have felt this same overwhelming sense of having crossed a threshold you can never return from. Write down, I thought I was losing my mind too, and let me know you. Understand what it's like when your entire worldview shatters in a single night. The creature stayed on my couch for 3 days, and those were the strangest, most terrifying, most profound days of my life. I called in sick to work, told them I had the flu, and I stayed in that cabin with this being from somewhere else, watching it recover, trying to communicate, trying to understand. It slept a lot those first 24 hours, a sleep that seemed deeper than human sleep, almost like hibernation. its body temperature dropping so low I thought it had died several times and had to check for breathing, for a pulse in places I guessed might have a pulse. When it was awake, it would watch me with those huge dark eyes, and I got the sense it was studying me as much as I was studying it, trying to figure out what kind of creature I was, if I was safe, if I was intelligent enough to understand anything it might try to convey. We worked out basic communication through gestures and drawings. I'd sketch something simple, a sun, a tree, a house, and it would respond with its own drawings that were more complex, more detailed, showing me things I couldn't fully comprehend, structures that might have been buildings or ships or something else entirely, symbols that looked mathematical or linguistic or both. On the second day, it was strong enough to stand, to walk around the cabin slowly, examining everything with intense curiosity, touching things carefully like it was, trying to understand their purpose and construction. It spent a long time looking at photographs on my walls, pictures of my family, my ex-wife, my parents who'd passed, and it pointed to them and then to me with a questioning gesture. And I nodded and said family. And it repeated the sound, family. The word coming out distorted but recognizable, and something about that, about this alien being trying to say that word, made me tear up in a way I didn't expect. It went to the window and looked out at the snow, at the forest, and made sounds I couldn't interpret, soft and melodic. And I wondered if it was afraid, if it was homesick, if it was wondering if its own people would come back for it, or if it had been abandoned here to die. That night, the second night, I woke up around 3 in the morning to find it standing by my bed, and I nearly had a heart attack. But it wasn't threatening. It was holding something out to me, one of those vials from its pouch, this one filled with silver liquid that sparkled like it had stars inside it. It pressed the vial into my hand, and then touched its own head, then touched mine, gently, with those long cold fingers against my forehead, and suddenly I was somewhere else. Not physically, but mentally I was seeing things, experiencing things, images and sensations flooding my consciousness faster than I could process. I saw its world, or what I interpreted as its world, a place with 2 suns and cities that grew like crystals, and beings, like it moving through spaces that defied geometry. And I saw its ship, the crew, the journey through darkness and distance I couldn't fathom. I saw the accident or attack or whatever it was that had damaged the craft, saw its companions dying or dead, saw it escaping in a smaller vessel that was failing, crashing here by chance or by desperation. I saw its fear and its loneliness and its gratitude toward me, this primitive creature who'd still had enough compassion to help. And I saw something else, something that terrified and fascinated me in equal measure. I saw that they'd been here before, not just this being but its kind, many times over thousands of years, watching, studying, sometimes interacting in subtle ways, present in the margins of human history, witnesses to our evolution and our struggles. When the vision or transmission or whatever it was ended, I was on my knees, on the floor, gasping, and the creature was supporting me with one arm, making soft sounds that might have been reassurance. I looked up at it, and I knew things I hadn't known before. Not facts exactly, but feelings, certainties, an understanding that we weren't alone and never had been, that the universe was full of life and consciousness in forms we couldn't imagine, and that we were children, barely beginning to understand the reality we lived in. The creature, and I'd started thinking of it with a name by then. I called it Voyager in my head because that's what it felt like. An eternal traveler gestured to the window, to the sky. And I understood it was saying it had to leave soon, that its people would come, or it would find a way to signal them, but that it needed to recover more first, needed to be stronger for the journey home or the next phase or whatever came after this. The third day was the hardest because I knew it was ending, this impossible situation, this brief window into something greater than myself. Voyager was almost fully healed, moving with more confidence, and it spent hours doing something with materials from around the cabin, creating this small device. From what looked like random objects, a battery from my flashlight, some wire, a piece of circuit board from an old radio but transformed, rebuilt on a molecular level, into something that hummed with that same blue-green energy its ship had produced. It was building a beacon or a communicator, something to call for rescue or transport. We spent that last evening sitting together by the wood stove, not communicating much, just being present. And I felt this profound sadness, knowing that I'd never be able to tell anyone about this, that no one would believe me, that this would be my secret, forever. This proof that we weren't the center of the universe, that we weren't alone, that everything we thought we knew was just the thinnest surface of something infinitely deeper and stranger. Around midnight, Voyager stood up suddenly, tilting its head like it was listening to something I couldn't hear, and it gathered its few belongings, those remaining vials, the device it had built, and moved toward the door. I followed, pulling on my coat, and we went outside into the cold, and the sky was clear for the first time in days, stars sharp and bright overhead, so many stars, and Voyager pointed up at a particular constellation, at a space between the stars, and made sounds that might have been coordinates or maybe just the name of home. We stood there for maybe 20 minutes, breath steaming in the freezing air, and then I saw it, a light descending, smaller than the ship, that had crashed but similar in its movement, that same impossible physics, and it landed in the clearing with absolute silence, and a section opened, and there were others inside, more of Voyager's kind, and they called out in those high whistling sounds, and Voyager turned to me one last time. Oh, reached out and touched my face with both hands, that burning cold touch. And I felt gratitude and friendship, and something like love, the universal recognition of one conscious being by another. The acknowledgement that despite all our differences, we both felt, we both feared, we both hoped, we both mattered. Then it pressed something into my hand, one of those vials, the one with silver starlight, and it made a gesture that I understood meant, keep this, remember. And then it walked up that ramp into the ship, turned once to look back at me, raised one hand in what I chose to interpret as a wave, and was gone. The ship rose into the sky and vanished, and I was left standing in my yard with a vial in my hand and a head full of impossible memories. And no way to prove any of it had been real, except for the strange marks in the snow that were already being covered by new fall, and the certainty in my own heart that my life would never be the same. I still live in that cabin, still work at the mill, still do all the ordinary things that make up a life. But it's different now. I'm different. I look at the sky differently, especially at night, wondering where Voyager is, if it made it home, if it thinks about me the way I think about it. I kept the vial, hidden away in a place no one would find it, and sometimes I take it out and look at that silver fluid with its impossible internal light, and I remember. I've thought about telling people, about going public, about trying to prove what happened. But who would believe me? And even if they did, what would it accomplish except to make me a target, to have government agents or scientists or conspiracy theorists camping out in my yard? Voyager trusted me to keep it safe, and in a way, I feel like I'm keeping its secret safe. Now keeping this proof of something wonderful and terrifying safe from a world that might not be ready for it. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, if the isolation and the cold and maybe a gas leak or carbon monoxide poisoning created this elaborate hallucination. But then I remember, details that are too specific to be invented, the texture of its skin, the smell of that dark blood, the way the healing filaments looked like growing crystals, the sensation of that telepathic connection. And I know it was real as anything else I've ever experienced. And I carry that knowledge with me like a weight and a gift. This understanding that we're not alone, that we're not the pinnacle of creation, that there are consciousnesses and civilizations out there beyond our comprehension, and that sometimes, rarely, miraculously, our paths cross theirs, and we get a glimpse of something greater, and we're changed forever by it. I've become more patient with people who tell strange stories, with folks who say they've seen things they can't explain, because I know now that the universe is weirder and more wonderful than we give it credit for. That reality has room for mysteries, that not everything can be measured or proven or captured on video, and that sometimes the most profound experiences are the ones that happen in isolation, that can't be shared or verified, that you just have to carry alone. I've also become more compassionate, more aware of suffering in all its forms, because Voyager was suffering when I found it, was dying and afraid, and it didn't matter that it was alien, that it was from somewhere unimaginably far away, that its biology and existence challenged everything I thought I knew. It still felt pain and fear, and the desperate will to survive, and I responded to that because that's what it means to be human, to recognize consciousness and choose to protect it, to help it, even when it's strange and frightening and impossible. The marks on my wrist where Voyager first grabbed me took weeks to fade, circular patterns of frostbite-like discoloration that eventually disappeared completely. But I could still see them in certain lights, like they'd been burned into me on some deeper level. I found myself dreaming more vividly, dreams where I was flying through space, or walking on alien worlds, or communicating without words. And I didn't know if those were my own imagination, or somehow residual effects from that telepathic connection, echoes of Voyager's consciousness still resonating in mine. I read more about astronomy and physics, trying to understand the implications of faster-than-light travel, of technologies that could manipulate matter on a molecular level, of civilizations that might be thousands or millions of years ahead of us, and the more I learned, the more I realized how little we actually know, how much of science is still guessing and theorizing, how many mysteries remain unsolved. One night, about 6 months after Voyager left, I was outside chopping wood, and I looked up and saw a meteor shower, dozens of shooting stars streaking across the sky, and I found myself crying, just standing there with tears freezing on my face, overwhelmed by the beauty and the vastness, and the loneliness of it all. Feeling connected to something huge and cosmic, and yet completely isolated in my knowledge, unable to share this thing that had happened to me, this proof that we weren't alone that only I knew about. I wanted to call someone, to tell someone, but who? My ex-wife would think I'd lost my mind. My co-workers would laugh, and anyone in authority would either dismiss me as crazy or, worse, believe me, and turn my life into a nightmare of interrogations and examinations and forced silence. So I kept it to myself, let it live inside me like a second heartbeat. This secret, that was both burden and blessing. I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before, strange lights in the sky that could be planes or satellites or something else. Stories in the news about unexplained phenomena that the government quickly explained away, patterns in history and mythology that suggested repeated contact between humans and something other. And I wondered how many people throughout time had had experiences like mine, had helped or hindered or simply witnessed something beyond normal understanding, and how many of them had stayed silent, carrying their knowledge alone, dying with their secrets because there was no safe way to share them. I thought about ancient astronaut theories and UFO abductions and all the stories I'd dismissed as nonsense, and while I still didn't believe all of them, I now believed some of them might be true. That scattered. Throughout human history, there had been these encounters, these moments of contact, and that they'd shaped us in ways we didn't recognize or acknowledge, influencing our mythology and our spirituality and our sense of possibility. The vial with the silver fluid remained my most precious possession, hidden in a waterproof container buried under the floorboards of my cabin, and I'd only taken it out a handful of times, always alone, always at night, always with a sense of reverence and fear. I'd thought about trying to analyze it, to take it to a lab somehow, but I knew that would be betraying Voyager's trust, that it had given it to me as a gift, not as evidence, as a reminder of our connection, not as proof for others. So it stayed hidden, and I stayed quiet, and life went on with its normal rhythms and routines. But underneath it all was this constant awareness, this knowing that changed how I saw everything, that made the ordinary world seem both more precious and more temporary, like we were all living in a bubble of ignorance that could pop at any moment if the truth ever came out, if the universe ever decided to reveal itself fully to humanity. I wondered sometimes what would happen if more ships came, if contact became undeniable, if the governments of the world could no longer hide or explain away the presence of alien life. And I felt both hope and dread at that prospect. Hope that humanity might finally grow up and join some larger cosmic community, dread that we might not be ready, that we might react with violence and fear, that our divisions and conflicts and prejudices might make us look primitive and dangerous to civilizations that had moved beyond such things. Voyager's people had seemed peaceful, or at least non-threatening, but I also sensed from that brief telepathic connection that they were cautious about us, that they watched and studied but kept their distance because we were unpredictable, volatile, still in our infancy as a conscious species. And I couldn't blame them for that caution, because look at how we treat each other, how we destroy our own planet, how we build weapons capable of ending all life and point them at our neighbors, how we kill over resources and ideologies and ancient hatreds, how we're brilliant and stupid in equal measure. The isolation I'd always sought out felt different now, less like running away and more like necessary solitude, like I needed the space and silence to process what had happened, to integrate this experience into my understanding of reality without going crazy. I stopped drinking as much, started taking better care of myself, because somehow Voyager's struggle to survive and heal had reminded me that life, any life, was precious and fragile, that consciousness itself was miraculous, that we had a responsibility to ourselves and to each other, and to whatever other beings might be out there to make something meaningful of our existence. It sounds dramatic, I know, but when you've watched an alien being fight for its life on your couch and then recovered enough to communicate gratitude and wisdom, it changes your priorities, makes the petty concerns and grudges that dominate most people's lives seem absurd and wasteful. I started volunteering at the local animal shelter, helping injured or abandoned creatures, and I recognized in their eyes that same desperate will to survive I'd seen in Voyager's, that same capacity for suffering and for joy, and it became important to me to reduce suffering wherever I encountered it, to be the person who helped rather than the person who looked away. My co-workers noticed the change in me, commented that I seemed different, calmer, more thoughtful, and I just shrugged and said, maybe I was getting older, maybe I was finally growing up, and they accepted that because people rarely question positive changes, they just appreciate them. But inside, I knew the truth, that I'd been given a gift, a glimpse of something greater, and that it came with a responsibility to be better, to do better, to honor the connection I'd made with a being from another world by being worthy of that connection. There were moments of doubt, of course, nights when I'd lie awake questioning my own memories, wondering if trauma or stress or some neurological event had created a false memory so vivid it seemed real. But then I'd go dig up that vial and hold it in my hands, feel its strange weight that seemed heavier than its size, watch the internal light swirl and pulse in patterns that no human technology could replicate, and I'd know, with absolute certainty, that it had happened, that Voyager was real, that I hadn't imagined or hallucinated any of it. The vial was proof, but only for me, because anyone else would need to see it and study it and try to understand it, and I wouldn't allow that, because it wasn't mine to share. It was a gift given in trust and meant to remain private. I thought about Voyager constantly during the first year, wondering where it was, if it had made it home or if it was still traveling, if it thought about me or if our encounter had been just a brief, forgettable moment in its long life, if it had told others about me or if I was its secret too. I imagined conversations we might have had if we'd had more time, if we'd developed better. Communication, questions I would have asked about its world, its experiences, its understanding of the universe, wisdom it might have shared about consciousness and purpose and the meaning of existence. I felt this profound sense of having been close to understanding something fundamental, and then having it taken away before I could fully grasp it, like being shown the answer to life's greatest mystery and then having the book slammed shut before you could read the whole page. The seasons changed, winter to spring to summer to another winter, and life continued. And gradually the raw intensity of the experience faded into something I could live with, something that was part of me but didn't dominate every moment, though it never stopped influencing how I saw the world. I became that guy who stares at the stars for too long, who listens too carefully to stories about strange phenomena, who has a strange sadness and hopefulness in his eyes that people sometimes notice and ask about. And I'd just smile and change the subject because how do you explain that you've touched something infinite, and now everything finite feels small by comparison? You can't, you just can't carry it and hope that carrying it makes you better rather than bitter, wiser rather than crazy. I'm telling you this story now, years later, not because I expect you to believe me, not because I have proof to offer, or because I want to convince anyone of anything, but because I need to tell it, need to get it out into the world, even if it's just as words in a video that most people will dismiss as fiction or fantasy. Maybe someone else out there has had a similar experience, has helped or encountered something beyond normal understanding, has carried their own secret knowledge for years, and maybe they'll hear this and feel less alone, less crazy, less isolated in their knowing. That's worth something, I think, that connection between people who've glimpsed the larger reality, who understand that the universe is stranger and more wonderful than most folks allow themselves to imagine. And maybe, just maybe, Voyager will somehow encounter this story, will recognize itself in my words, will know that I've kept its secret safe all these years but needed to honor our connection by sharing what it meant to me, by acknowledging that it changed my life and made me better, and gave me a perspective I'll carry until I die. If you've experienced something you can't explain, something that challenged everything you thought you knew about reality, I want you to know you're not alone in that feeling. You're not crazy or broken or delusional just because you've seen something others haven't. Reality is bigger than we're taught to believe. Consciousness exists in more forms than we can imagine. And sometimes, rarely, miraculously, we get to witness that truth firsthand. Don't let anyone take that away from you. Don't let skeptics or debunkers or people who need the world to be small and safe diminish what you've experienced and what you know to be true. Hold on to it, learn from it, let it change you for the better, and know that you're part of something larger, that you've been touched by the mystery and the wonder, and that makes you special, even if you can never prove it to anyone else. Hit that like button if this story resonated with you in any way. Drop a comment telling me about times you felt something beyond normal explanation. And subscribe because I'm going to keep sharing these experiences, these moments when the ordinary world cracked open and showed something extraordinary underneath. And maybe together, we can build a community of people who understand that reality is bigger and stranger and more beautiful than we're usually allowed to acknowledge. And that's something worth celebrating, worth exploring, worth keeping alive in our hearts. And our conversations, even when the world tells us we're being foolish or naive or crazy for believing in more than what we can touch and measure and prove.